I call this regular city council work session to order. May I have roll call, please?
Mayor Curtis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Here.
Councilmember Alton.
Here.
Councilmember Longabaugh.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. Item number one. Mr. Schrock, welcome.
This is the discussion regarding fiscal year 2009 budget update.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. We're here tonight to talk about the fiscal year 2009 budget and the progress that we've made to date and where we're going for the future. This presentation, we're going to work with the communications department to put this on the city's website under the management and budget webpage, so it will be available for the public to review as necessary. We also have some handouts here tonight for the public sitting in the audience. So tonight's work session looks like this. We have four major areas that we want to cover: the economic conditions, fiscal year 2009 revenues, and the fiscal year 2009 outlook. We also want to talk about the capital improvement plan, just in generalities here. So as some of you may have heard, or if not all of you, you know the economic condition or the outlook for the nation as a whole. There's oftentimes talks of recession. There's numerous articles about that. Some believe we are, some people believe we're not. Someone like Alan Greenspan has made a pretty dire quote there that might be a little dramatic for this presentation, but it's worth putting on here and at least noting. We want to mention that we expect a long-term recovery for the nation, but that shouldn't be much different for the local level as well. The state of Arizona has obviously projected to have a significant deficit going into the next fiscal year as they do this year. $1.9 billion is a significant amount and may impact the city of Surprise and just every city in whole as the legislature continues to look for ways of mending that deficit. City of Phoenix, again, big news there, 500 potential positions for elimination. They do have a significant number of employees, upwards of 14,000, so they are looking at cuts as well. City of Mesa, same deal. A town that we tend to look to for growth projections and who have experienced a lot of growth similar to us is the town of Gilbert. A pretty staggering number is that they issued 2 permits in the month of January. And so that's something to take note of as everyone moves forward in the current economy. And they are looking at cuts and have actually conducted elimination of positions, including 9 layoffs. So for the city of Surprise, the overall collection for us this current fiscal year, we've given a presentation on revenues about 2 months ago. In that discussion, we said, you know, we had to look at some revised, the overall projections do look good when you look at all of the collections for the city as a whole. That includes everything from the review fees to the permit fees to local sales tax, everything of that nature. There are areas of concern still. The local sales tax, at that point, we said, well, we're not going to hit the original projection by about $1.5 million. That would be, to put it into perspective, we were expecting about $28 million. However, the commercial activity that we're experiencing has made up that gap, so the overall collections look good for this fiscal year. But we do need to be concerned about the active legislature. Although they've been fairly quiet at this point, nothing is off the table. The state shared revenues, again, is a significant portion for us as a city to receive. We want to protect those every year that we can. It's a major source of revenue for us. And again, the state's budget deficit, that's driving that. So again, something that may not be of concern at this point is the assessed valuation for the city. Because of the new growth that we've seen, the assessed valuation continues to move upward at a good pace. It could become an issue if home prices fall and the commercial activity slows down. That could impact our bonding capacity and eventually the property tax collections. So for 2009 in the outlook, we tend to come to you and give you this picture every year. On the left here, we give you an update on February, and that's where we were. We thought that we'd have about $1.1 million available for new and ongoing programs. Today, we've had to revise some of those projections further down to reflect the current market conditions, and we believe that we have about $200,000 available at this point in time. Again, that's part of the budget process. We're meeting with management on a regular basis. We've had 2 weeks of solid meetings on the budget. And so by the time we get to the council during the retreat, we'll have additional updated numbers with a recommended budget. But again, the amount requested from the staff was $14 million, so that there are a lot of demands or requests for new programs and services. Financially positioning the city. As we look at the budget we're putting together for every year, we want to make sure that we've got the city in a position that will sustain itself for not just this year, but in the future. We do that by making sure that we have strong financial policies. One-time revenues are used for one-time expenditures. Ongoing revenues are used for the ongoing expenditures. And that has done a good job of keeping us in a financially sound position and something that we continue on a year-to-year basis. We also want to make sure that we're revising the projections to actually reflect the market conditions as best as we can. Obviously, we can't be real precise, but we take the best information that we have on hand and use that to make projections that will keep the city in a position that, it's easier to add things back in than it is to actually make cuts. So we don't want to put ourselves in that position. So revise projections, be conservative. The immediate and long-term planning, again, the current budget, the 5-year plan with the CIP, the capital improvement plan, want to make sure that those reflect market conditions, make sure that we're growing with the growth of the city, and then if it's contracting, we also have the ability to contract. We regularly, every year, we are running 5-year projections, make sure that there's no structural deficits as we move forward. So you don't want to get in a situation where we commit to something that we can't afford. So making those projections and the revisions to those projections, single-family residential units, that was a significant portion of revenue for capital projects. It was the source of revenue for capital projects during the high growth periods. Our projections have changed. This is just since February. We started at 1,000, moved that down to 850, moved that down to 700. When you're looking at about $16,000 per home, that does add up after a while. But again, we want to make sure that we're conservative, and 700 homes is still a pretty good amount for any city. And when you think about it, most cities back east would love to have 700 new permits, new single-family residential homes in a year. But again, for the city of Surprise, that's a pretty low number. We think it's conservative, but we also think it's going to reflect what's going on in the current market. Just graphically looking at what we've seen over the few years here, since fiscal year 2004, and the number of permits that have been issued by fiscal year. You can see the drop off significantly. So again, we want to make sure that we're realistic in our projections and we're not getting out ahead of ourselves in those projections. On the commercial side, or the non-residential, everything else, apartment complexes, offices, condominium type projects, we originally projected to do 2 million square feet for this next coming fiscal year. That would be reflective of what we actually budgeted this year. Projections at this point for the current fiscal year, we think we're going to have about 2.8 million square feet of commercial activity. So that's higher than what we budgeted. But again, as we move into fiscal year 2009, we want to make sure that we're not out ahead of things, and we don't know for certain where the commercial square footage is going to end. So we projected 1.5 million square feet. This section of projections will drive a budget person crazy. This is, we just don't have a good grasp of what's going on here. Years back, there was a time in Phoenix when 0 commercial square footage was actually constructed. So I don't know if we're at that point, but there is that possibility. So how does it look for the capital improvement plan and our projections? Again, I wanted to show you every year we look at a 5-year window to make our projections. So each year, 2006 through 2010, we thought, we budgeted 29,000, nearly 30,000 permits. That's dropped down to each 5 year again. So we're looking at 2009 through 13. We're dropping that down to 3,800 permits for 5 years. That has a significant impact on the available resources that we have as a city to construct capital projects, but that should also reflect what's going on in the market and the demand for those capital projects. So anything that's related to growth should also be pushed off because there, in theory, shouldn't be the need for those growth-related projects. So the 5-year plan, again, reflects the major changes in the growth. However, when the city manager's recommended budget is going to come to you, we're going to make sure that we want to hit on the projects that are in place or that we're looking at funding and completing. And that's that list there: City Hall, Bell Road, Swarview, Reams Road, Fire Station 307. There are others, but this is the major projects. And again, the CIP is something that's we're still working on that, under development. We're going to work with the council through the budget retreat. There's nothing finalized there, but we want to make sure we get your input on what the priorities are for capital projects. But again, we want to make sure you see the projects that we're looking at continuing to fund for fiscal year 2009. So when the economy takes a turn like this and cities have more projects or items that they'd like to construct than they do funding, we try to look at additional revenue sources. So cities will turn to debt and bonding as potential projects or potential ways of funding that. The instruments to do that, again, revenue bonds. That's something that's typically used for utilities. It requires a voter's approval. Again, something that we would use for those, sanitation, sewer, water. The Municipal Property Corporation and MPC, that's something that the city has used in the past. It does not require voter approval. There's no limit on the amount that could be issued, but it does require that the city pledge operating or ongoing revenues to pay the debt service. The Community Facilities District, we put that up there because, again, the council, although it's an instrument for revenue, it's not something that we would use to construct projects, but again, it would affect the district that it was formed around or that it formed the district, so you would have projects within there, but that's not something that we as a city would necessarily use. The one we want to talk about is the general obligation bonds. The City of Surprise fiscal year 2009 budget, we're going to look at we need to talk to the council about that as a possibility for revenues for projects that would be beyond what's already included in the recommended budget. The pros of this is you do have to get voter approval. They're the ones who have to decide that they want to raise their own taxes. They support the projects. They've been involved in the project process. Again, you'd get them through, you get through committees, you get inputs through meetings through the districts, things of that effect. The funds that come from this can fund anything. We're not restricted like the development impact fees. They can fund anything that the city has put out there and the voters have said yes to. And it will not impact operating revenues. That's a very important part of this. This type of borrowing comes with its own revenue source. That's why it's highly regarded by the cities on a regular basis and looked to most regularly. The cons, it can take time to do this. You can get the public involvement. You can decide if you want to do a lot or a little. Most cities do a lot of public involvement. The voters could say no. Then you're left with, you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do. You're not going to do those projects. Do you want to change your priorities for current funding? Another negative could be the increased property taxes. Most cities try to time this so that the secondary debt doesn't go away, and you're in a position where you say, okay, residents, we're looking at doing this bond package. We want to deliver all these projects. It's not going to result in a new tax. It's just going to keep your tax at the current rate. The Dysart Unified School District did that recently with their bond package. It did not result in a new tax. However, it resulted in the continuation of the tax. So again, the purpose and the need, we've discussed that. Again, when revenues slow down and the demand or the identified priorities are still out there, we need to figure out some way of bridging the gap between those the revenues and the projects. Some ways that you can package these projects is through the obvious transportation, parks and recreation, public safety, land, and economic development. You can break these out as separate questions, separate categories, or you can package them all as one, where the commission or the city would say, voters, would you like to approve a bond package in the amount of, and then give the total? Or you could say, would you like to make improvements to roadways within the City of Surprise? Yes or no. So you could have options of how we as a city would package that question for the voters. Some of the items in the bond package itself, the council, we've shared those just briefly recently and said, here you go, take a look at this, what do you think? Provided some of the items here if we want to go into discussion about that. These are the items. So I've broken them out into the transportation piece. There's a listing there. And so there's a number of projects that would be included. Again, the way that these projects were identified was through the arterial capacity study that the engineering department completed about 6 months ago. Through that work, they prioritized where the city had needs to complete roadways, so build them out from two lanes to 4 lanes, get rid of the scallop streets so that the traffic can flow freely. And then there was a priority ranking placed on those, just again, based on constructability, right-of-way issues, when they can be constructed, and if there were paybacks associated with those, potential paybacks associated with those projects. Parks and Recreation, we've identified just a few projects here. Again, we want to know where the council stands on these projects. Certainly if the council believes that these are priorities or not priorities at all, we would need to hear from you on that during the budget retreat. Certainly want to know if this is something that you would like to go forward with. The public safety component, again, we've identified just a couple projects here, but again, we have potential to change this and include additional projects. We could say we want a bond for all fire stations. That could be something that we talk about in the future. So this could modify as well, just based on the input from council. Land and economic development, we've separated this out because council has said that economic development is a priority. Land acquisition could be a priority. Preservation of loot could be a priority. So we've placed this as a potential item for the general obligation bond. Heard Museum is included in there because, again, we're not necessarily sure where council stands on this project and the West Valley Art Museum project, and we need to hear from you as whether or not this is still a priority. If, in fact, we were to go with a general obligation bond, would you want to do this? And that's something that, again, could discuss now, we could discuss later. So the last part of this slide itself is the impact on the secondary rates. This will have an impact on the voters if, in fact, council decides that you'd like to go forward with a general obligation bond for fiscal year 2008 or 2009. This slide here shows the property tax comparison for the valley in itself and shows where the city of Surprise kind of ranks or compares to other places. This purple line here, the blue itself, is the primary property tax, and that's what we use for operations, about $5-6 million a year. The purple portion above it here is the secondary tax. That's about 10 cents to the dollar. That is what's used to pay for the debt that would be issued through bonds. And so taking a look at that, you would tend to see that there's some capacity there to move forward with issuance of debt and the potential for raising the property taxes. Although we've been talking about raising the property taxes, there is some way of looking at this. I want to make sure we talk about what's under consideration. Now we show the three rates here, 50 cents, 75, $1. Each one of those carries an amount of money that the city could, in fact, receive from the rate itself. So if we go out and say, okay, public, we're going to issue, we want the voters approve this and say, okay, they're willing to levy the $1. Again, we don't necessarily have to go out there and levy the $1 all at once. We certainly wouldn't do that because the projects within the general obligation bond are phased, they're planned, they're timed. So over time, we would issue the debt, and then the rate would go up for the property tax. But we're saying we're going to cap it. It won't go over that amount if, in fact, the voters would approve that. So you can see what we would generate based on those property tax rates. So if we said, we would like to go out for $275 million worth of projects, if those are the projects that have been identified, it would result in potentially a $1 rate increase. Again, not necessarily all at once, but it could go up to that amount. And so you can see what the impact would be to a home assessed at $250,000. So it would, the maximum we're looking at $250 a year. The minimum, we could go up to $125 a year, or go down to $125 a year. Are there any questions on this stuff so far? I haven't asked you that. This is your work session just as much as it's mine, so stop me if you have questions. Some dates to be aware of. The required dates by law, if we were to go forward with a general obligation bond, July 7th is a call for election. We need to make sure that the council would be on board, say, yes, this is something that we want to do. Call for election. We let the Maricopa County know that we're going to go forward and put the item on the ballot. The November 4th would be the election date, and we'd know within a short period of time whether or not the voters had said yes or no to those bond package items. So we show the budget retreat date here, April 18th and 19th. There is time to move forward with this if that's the pleasure of council. There is a lot of public involvement that would need to be required between April 19th and July 7th. But again, wanted to point that out to all of you, that we could still go forward with this if that's the pleasure of council, if those additional projects were a desire to the council. Some of the upcoming items for the mayor and council, again, the budget books that we're working on now, it will be ready for you on the 4th. We'll deliver those to you, or you can pick them up here. We'll make sure that we have the budget retreat. I apologize, I didn't update this. It's supposed to be 4/18 and 4/19, so we've planned 2 days for the retreat just in case. And I'm sure it will take a good day, at least a good day and a half. We'll have the departments presenting to you the recommended portions of their budget. And again, just the July 1st is the new fiscal year, so that's kind of the timeline we want to line out for you as far as this is concerned. That's what I have to go over with you at this point. Do you have questions of me? Any topics that you'd like to go back to?
Council, questions?
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Michael, one of the main things is timing, especially if we're going to decide to do any kind of bonding at all. And this is not a good year for that type of, I think, to ask the public to come through with a tax increase, even if it is an even tax increase. We have homes being foreclosed. We have people losing their homes. People are losing their jobs. The economic slowdown is not looking like it's going to slow down for a while. It might be presumptuous of us to try to go out and get a GO bond put out this year. When we discuss this on the 18th and 19th, I think we need to look at the ramifications of what projects are the highest priority and perhaps find a way to do a few of them and maybe delay asking the public until we have a better time. If we had done this in 03 or 04, I think it wouldn't have been anything more than a slam dunk because people were, in a high energy time. People were seeing their rates of their homes going up very quickly. It's not happening anymore. I mean, I talked to some people just this last couple of days that have seen their assessed valuation drop $50,000 to $100,000 in a $300,000 or $400,000 home. So, I mean, that's a large chunk of change to see the average family have to come up with. And even though it's only $250 a year at that $1 rate, that's still going to be a very difficult thing for some people to swallow and vote for. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion?
Michael, thank you for your presentation.
Through the chair. Thank you for giving us more time, too. I noticed that you're going to get them to us the 4th this year, so that's good. Normally it was a week, and it was pretty intense. So thanks for giving up, about 2 weeks to look at them, Michael. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mr. Alton.
Yes, thank you. Michael, thank you very much. You have changed. We have met individually with you in the past week or so, and I am glad to see that you have now shown us what is going to be paid back by developers, which has an impact. I mean, if we're going to spend some money and we have a repayment source, that puts that money back into the coffers of the city for future use. What would be interesting is to even take this beyond that and let us know what your projected date of repayment would be. It's hard, I know, because we're really relying upon development and when that takes place.
Correct.
But you might want to look at the agreements and so forth as to timing and see if, and maybe put it on a little calendar as to years that these are projected out, that they need to be done by in order for, or when we calculate that the improvements will be done to the land. And then we may want to prioritize those other than the priority that you currently have from the engineering department. Okay? Because I think we would all be prone to approve some items that are going to get paid back in a relatively short period of time. And that might impact our cash flow a little bit and better position us for future opportunities. It's almost like a revolving fund. And that is, we use so many dollars initially, and then we use those same dollars back again for these other developments as they come to fruition. But if you can do that, I appreciate it, and I thank you very much for doing this.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Councilmember Alton, I truly apologize. I thought you thanked him and that was it, so I didn't mean to interrupt, and sorry about that.
Anything further? I'd like to thank you very much. The last few weeks have been very intense during this budgeting process, and you guys have done a great job, brought forward great information. And just to make sure that our city attorney is aware of this, if he leaves employment of Surprise, he too will be responsible for nearly $4 million worth of road improvements, as Mr. Bliley appears to be. So we might want to check into that. I don't know if we'll have complete agreement from Mr. Bliley. Maybe he represents somebody that will be paying that bill. If not,
That's a
We'll,
good observation. Thank you.
I'll have to be talking to him. So,
Just Mayor and Council, just very quickly, thanks, Michael, for that presentation. And one of the reasons, obviously for doing this is to give you an update, but also to have you look at, the projects that, as Michael said, came out of a study. And so we basically want to make sure that those priorities match the priorities of the council. And not only that, Michael talked about the public participation, and that's also very important in putting together any kind of a list for GEO. And we share obviously your concerns about the timing and also the economic situation that we're in. So I want to thank the budget team because they've done a great job, and we will see you again in April 18th and 19th to really get into this. Thank
okay,
you.
and once again, thank you for opening up this process and being very patient with council, and thank you, councilors, for the amount of work you've done already. So, having said that, this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Reconvene at 6.